Months after the leak spread round the world changed the way that we look at the NSA, the U.S. is still looking for former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden. They want to know where he is, how he was able to steal all that data, and what information he still has yet to expose. In the midst of this manhunt, several people have fallen in the crossfire. One of them is Lavabit, founder of the encryption site Lavabit. He's cooperated with authorities in the past on criminal investigations, but when the feds came knocking this time around, they didn't want just a few emails. They wanted his entire SSL code. That's the code that encrypts the entire Lavabit service. He fought for months with authorities before he finally was forced to hand it over. And right as he did it, this message popped up on the website Lavabit. It's a letter announcing Lavabit's permanent closure. The letter says that Levinson pulled it down for moral reasons and that he was legally not allowed to explain why. Well, after months of questions and speculation, Levinson is finally allowed to talk about his ordeal. He joined me last week to tell me what made him decide to pull that website down and the lengths that the government went to get its hands on that SSL code.
I was surprised at the length they were willing to go to conduct their investigation. I honestly believe that the lawyers and the FBI agents involved felt that they were doing the right thing. I just think that, they didn't realize that in the process of conducting their investigation, they were effectively violating the privacy rights of all of my users and had quickly become effectively the greatest domestic enemy to our Constitution in recent memory. That's my own personal political belief.
Now, what exactly was the government trying to get, and what in fact did they get? I understand that they were trying to get your SSL encryption key and that you did hand them over a manual copy, but that copy is 2,560 characters long. Did you in fact hand over that electronic copy that they were asking for?
Yes, I did it the day I shut down, and it was why I shut down. If they had the capability to listen and effectively intercept it, decrypt and examine all of the traffic coming in and out of my network, and they were completely unwilling to provide the kind of transparency that I requested to ensure that they were only collecting the information they were legally authorized to collect, then I was completely uncomfortable with continuing to operate my service. And that's effectively why I decided to shut down. What they wanted to do is against the law in the United States. The only reason they're allowed to do it is because they gave themselves immunity. And that's what I meant when I said crimes against the American people. If it's wrong, it should be against the law, but that means our government shouldn't be allowed to do it.
So, do you have any regrets about shutting Lavabit down?
No, I have no regrets about shutting it down. The only reason I hesitated, the only reason I thought about keeping it open was because I understood the impact it would have on my users. I've felt it myself, having gone almost 2 months now without any email, without an account. So I know their pain. But I was bothered even more by the thought of a government being able to record everything that I said and did online. I was bothered even more by the prospect of the government being able to capture my password and access all of the administrative tools on my system. I was bothered even more by the fact that they were requesting this very private, very confidential piece of business information from me, who was an innocent third party in this, and the fact that they weren't going to let me tell anybody about this request. I had decided very early on that I could live with the request if I was allowed to talk about it. What I couldn't live with, what I couldn't do, would be give them those keys and continue to operate the service, to become effectively a listening post for the federal government. That bothered me at a very deep ethical and moral level. And I felt that the only way to kind of let myself out of that was to shut down the service.
And as I understand it, you tried to compromise with authorities. Can you go into detail about the compromises that you offered?
Yeah. When I designed the service back in 2004, I decided consciously at that point not to log any information that I didn't think was technically necessary, because I didn't want to have to turn it over if I ever received an NSL. I wanted to remove myself from the equation. Well, here I had a court order which was signed off on by a judge. So that was a different situation than an NSL, which is only signed off on by a supervisor at the FBI. So I had less of a moral issue with turning over the metadata. So what I offered to do was add code that would effectively log just the meta information, just the to and the from of the messages that were sent for the particular user account in question. I felt that that would have been something that would allow me in good conscience to continue operating the service. And the FBI came back, or at least in this case, sorry, the Department of Justice lawyer came back and said, nope, that's not good enough. We want the data in real time. And I said, you mean you want to be able to log in and change the parameters on your device to collect other information without telling me? At least that's how I inferred it. So what I told them is that if they want me to let them use my SSL keys, then they would have to provide some kind of transparency. Allow me to audit the configuration of the device so that I know it's only collecting the information for the one account, and it's only collecting the information that they were legally authorized to collect. And they absolutely refused. They wouldn't hear of it. In fact, they wouldn't tell me anything about the device in question, how big it was, who made it, anything. I kept going back to, well, what do they have to hide? If they want this kind of information, if they want this kind of access, then they have to prove to me that they're not going to abuse the authority. And they wouldn't provide it. And as a result, I felt I had an ethical duty to protect the trust that had been placed in me by all of my users, to fight their request. And I did so with all the resources at my disposal, which weren't that significant. But eventually I lost. And as a result, I felt at that point the only ethical choice was to shut down.
And a question that people have been asking me to ask you is, can we expect Lavabit to come back in the future? And if not, what advice do you have to internet users in the U.S. to protect their privacy?
What I'm working on now is raising some venture capital so that I can take the code that used to power Lavabit and release it as an open source project. I've been talking to some people about doing that. I figured if I can't have a Lavabit service, maybe I can have 100 Lavabit-like services out there for people to choose from. In terms of what people should do, look for email service providers that aren't hosted in the U.S. Look for ones that are hosted in countries that tend to have strong data privacy laws, like Switzerland or Iceland or even Germany. Russia, too. Frankly, most countries in the world these days have better protections for people's privacy than they do in the U.S. The only problem I had was, as an American living in America, if I had moved my servers abroad, I would still be subject to U.S. law. So it wasn't an option for me unless I was ready to become an expatriate. And, you know, I've effectively decided to stay here and fight, because I think freedom's just a little too important to give up on.
That was Ladar Levinson, owner and operator of Lavabit, LLC.